You know, shooters are a very immersive game in general. It allows you to look through the eyes of the playable character, and often do one of the most horrible things you can imagine: shoot and kill other people. Well, sometimes the targets are monsters, but at the end of the day, it's killing. Perhaps everybody has heard the famous Karmax quote in one form or another, saying something like, "The story in games is as important as story in porn." Well, you can have different opinions about that, but I think more than 30 years of shooter genre development have shown that the success of the core shooting gameplay mechanic is not the only key to success. Unlike, let's say, it works for sport games or some simulators like racing simulators, where the quality of the core gameplay mechanic is the defining part of the success of a game. If it worked that way for shooters, probably the most successful game would be some shooting race simulator or a game that implements the shooting mechanic and the guns handling mechanic in a best way. But it's not like that, let's face it. I mean, of course, with all the things said, no matter how well all the other details and aspects of a game are made, it's important to make the core gameplay part of a shooter, well, shooting, engaging and captivating. And the funny thing is, usually the non-shooting episodes are the ones that making actually shooting interesting and engaging. So despite the fact that the entire gameplay revolves around shooting, we need other things to make the shooting fun and interesting to play. Yeah, I could have dragged the introduction even further, so let's just start. Hello, it's me, and let's speak about why the possibility not to shoot usually plays in the hands of a shooter game. Поехали. And let's put it straight, I'm not going to speak about such things as cutscenes that tell stories, and not about music that procures the appropriate atmosphere. These things are obvious and are used in all the games. I don't see any point on paying attention to that. I'm speaking about episodes when a player takes part in gameplay, but is actually not involved in actively pulling the trigger. And just not to walk far, do you remember this level from Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare? Of course, probably this is not the first time some game used this way of storytelling. Perhaps the very first thing that comes to my mind is the beginning of Half-Life. But what a banger this level was when it came out. Despite the fact that during a level you literally do nothing but just watch and listen and try to understand what's going on, probably the level of immersion is the highest one ever possible, because the narration goes through your own eyes. You ride through a city that is being captured by some army, you see people being executed on the streets, vehicles, tanks, the voice of propaganda that can be heard all across the city, people shooting in the air, and perhaps the most important thing, you are being executed at the end of the level, and you can see it through your own eyes. Wow. You see that through your own eyes because you are, well, playing as a president that you had been told during a briefing. And let's face it, if this was just some briefing explaining these events or just some dialogue, it wouldn't work that way, because of the complete detachment. In this case, it works that well, because you literally see the events. Or rather, it would have been just some simple motivation to kill some bad guys that are doing some bad things somewhere. No, but here you see that through your own eyes, and that's why it's so important, that's why it works so well. Of course, we are speaking about Call of Duty, which is by no means a high-level standard of storytelling, world building, and procuring the atmosphere. But even for such a primitive game, this worked amazingly well, and it was an amazingly fresh episode and a way of storytelling. In fact, a similar episode appears in the game later on when you observe the aftermath of the nuclear bomb explosion. And again, here it is just an episode where you can do nothing, you just move a bit and just die at the end of it. But it's so powerful and it's so interesting just because it's like seeing the event firsthand through your own eyes. It's not just some hearing somebody speaking about that. No, it's here, it's you being in it. In a very similar way, Far Cry 2 kicks off with you being driven across the country and shown things around. Africa, savannah, soldiers, poverty, recently destroyed houses by the soldiers you've just seen. All of that gives the initial understanding and the context of a place that you've just arrived. You hear the opinion about foreigners as you are from the taxi driver, as from his opinion, they are just sucking resources and giving nothing back. Once you arrive at the military post, you see the driver switching out the radio station that can potentially cause some problems, and you'd rather be safe. And generally, the guy tries to please the soldiers, just not to cause some trouble.
Gentlemen, you are posted here all day. On my way back, I grabbed some cold beer. You drink beer?
Yep, beer. We drink beer. Hurry up then. Move along.
I think this sets a pretty specific tone and atmosphere for the place that you are going to spend a few several hours in. Of course, this is not something unusual. You can see this technique in a lot of games and a lot of movies because this is a very powerful method of giving the initial context and initial understanding of a place. If this is directed properly, the sequence can be very important as it sets the initial atmosphere and initial mood for a player or a watcher that they would bring through the entire artwork, and that would only amplify the impression of it. I've just given you the examples of entire missions without gameplay and shooting as such, dedicated to building the environment and atmosphere around the player. However, it does not necessarily have to be like that. It can be some short episode or some part of a mission, or just some detail that is not about shooting, but that works very well and helps to build the environment around the player. I would personally encourage you to look around more and pay attention to such things because, in fact, a lot of work is put into them. And in fact, that would only help you to understand games and worlds in them. Here's an example not from a shooter, but it's so illustrating that I could not help mentioning it here. And besides, the entire scene is made from a first-person perspective, so it's still relevant here. In Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, you arrive at a train station and go through a preliminary documents control. And just take a look how the officer is checking the documents. He's initially very aggressive towards you. Once you hand him the documents, he takes it with such an aggressive move, and he looks for them with such an aversion, as if he tries to nitpick something. His tone, his movements, all of that are all about how he detests you because of who you are, the person with augmentations. This is such a small detail, and in fact it really is, but how important this is for the subsequent understanding of the world, where people with augmentations are considered second-class citizens. No dialogue, no video would ever give a similar impression and convey similar emotions as seeing that through your own eyes and living through such moments as if it happens to you. This happens right in the beginning of the game, and this sets a very appropriate tone and mood of the world not being welcome to you because of who you are. If you play the game, you see a lot of details and moments showing the inferior attitudes toward people like you are. Generally, Deus Ex is a very smart and interesting game that I really suggest you to play and pay attention to a lot of details, which the game is full of. Yeah, can't stop speaking about things that I like. If these moments and details never existed, most of the gaming worlds would never work. They would exist, but we would never believe in them, because the games would just turn into the pure mechanical activity, as, let's say, Counter-Strike. Nothing bad to say about Counter-Strike, I really like this game. But the thing is, the game is purely gameplay oriented. The contextuality of things happening around is completely irrelevant here. It doesn't make the game bad, but for the games where the world and the atmosphere is important, that would never work. The episode that actually made me record this video is the beginning of one of the missions in Call of Duty World War II. Maybe too many examples from Call of Duty? No? You may have different opinions about the game, but there is one episode that stuck in my mind, maybe for like 7 years. In the beginning of one of the missions, you are not being dropped in the middle of the fight, but instead you are asked to deliver food to a sentry that is watching the enemy's cannons. Yeah, this is a very short episode, and it doesn't really play any important role here. Instead, it is here for just to create atmosphere of the military brotherhood that should be present in the game. Yeah, characters here are primitive puppets, but this is such an interesting detail to show them being together, living on the battlefield, fighting side by side. You get a chance to walk through a camp, you see things happening around, you can greet other guys. Yeah, this is a very quick and swift episode that doesn't play any important role, but it just builds the atmosphere, the environment around the player. And besides, It's just a great pause from a constant killing of endless enemies. So, what's the simplest inference can we make from these episodes? What brings them the biggest value? It is first person view and the capability it brings. A chance to look at the episode and live it through as if this were you. This significantly increases the immersion into the situations, and they would never work if they were shown just you from the side. First person games are called first person not by coincidence. This is a great tool and a great opportunity to show the world through the character's eyes, and this is just a great tool in the hands of a good director. I don't know about you, but I've always liked such episodes when the gameplay revolves not around killing enemies, but around something different, when we do something different. I have a feeling that everybody tries to add as much shooting gameplay as possible, completely neglecting such episodes which actually make the shooting contentful. In fact, this is not that complicated. The things and episodes I'm speaking about are activities that normal people would do in real life in this situation, just regular things. It might be the case that developers think that the audience of their games is stupid enough and just think of shooters as of just some mechanical activity. Well, I personally may say that this is not true. I understand that a lot of people play games for atmosphere, for the world, for stories, and shooting is usually not the first thing why they come to shooters. That's why it's very important to pay attention to such things. And if I may speak on the behalf of people liking such elements, please add more of them in the games. I really appreciate them. We really appreciate them. And the last thing that I want to speak about are the gameplay oriented changes. Have you ever thought why stealth missions are so interesting to play? Of course, there's a beauty of sneaking around and killing enemies silently, no doubt. But I think such episodes make the players look at the world in a different way. I don't know about you, but I definitely start paying more attention to the world and environment around me during the stealth missions, just because they give such an opportunity not to focus on killing 30 enemies in 10 seconds, but just rather focus on other things. I think the coolest example of such a mission would be, again from Call of Duty, Black Ops Cold War, I think that's the way it's called. Well, the mission in the KGB headquarters. No matter how small sense this level makes, this is just an amazing episode in terms of how it switches the gameplay and sets new rules for a player. Now you don't need to pull the trigger 24/7. Now here you need to sneak around, steal things, strangle enemies, explore the area. It's a great example how to make a drastic change in gameplay and pull the player from constant shooting and killing into something completely different. It sets new rule for the player and for the environment, and this allows the player to look at the game and world at a different perspective. And I think this is very important. That's what makes the level that memorable. Especially if we think about the fact that this is a Call of Duty game, which is, well, let's be honest, is not a pinnacle in terms of the variety of gameplay. That's why this episode feels that fresh. Besides, this is just a great example how to maintain the pace of the entire game. Let's be honest, 3, 4, 5 hours of straight gameplay that involves just shooting enemies would make tired and bored anyone. For my opinion, this is just a golden episode, not just only because of the location, but also because of how much value it brings to the game. I know, it all may sound like I don't like the shooting gameplay, and it only brings me boredom and I try to escape it. No, this is not true. I really like shooters with all my heart from the childhood. More than that, I realized that probably in general, shooters are not the smartest genre on the planet, and I probably should not expect something mind-blowing in terms of story, world, and even gameplay. I know that most single-player shooters are just a chewing gum that you spend a few hours and that's it. And yeah, I realize all of that. More than that, I know how to like it, and I really like it. I'm fine with that. What I don't like is when there is absolutely no effort on trying to immerse the player into the gameplay and make it interesting. I don't like when everything feels so artificial and fake that it doesn't even drive me further to play. And I don't have any special requirements for a game. A usual Call of Duty story usually works for me, with a stretch, but works. Not all of them, but generally it's fine just to barely make sense for the main part. In a similar way, I cannot connect with multiplayer only shooters. Maybe this is my childhood speaking, but for me, a shooter game has always comprised of two parts, single player and multiplayer. And you complete the main story before entering the multiplayer mode. And the aim of the single player campaign, besides telling the story, is introduce you to the world of the game and, well, build the environment, build the atmosphere, such that when entering a multiplayer, it's interesting, you understand things happening around. This combination works because the single player part establishes the required connection for a person to play the multiplayer more and more. Of course, there are examples of multiplayer only shooters that I like that caught my attention immediately, and I didn't even bother about the lack of the single player campaign. Yeah, there are cases like that. At the same time, there are cases when I cannot play the multiplayer game because I don't feel it, I don't have the required connection with it. It hasn't been established with me. A single player campaign would definitely help with it. For example, this worked with Hunt 1890 something, whatever the game called. I played a few hours in it and I just don't understand the world. It doesn't click with me. I can't imagine that this is just my thing. However, I think there are more people like that who just like single player shooters, who like living through stories. Maybe not always profound, maybe not very well developed, not very smart, but at least the ones that you can follow and generally get the pleasure from it. Yeah, I know that the main money makers for the gaming industry right now are multiplayer games and all the things around them. But just saying it here, I like single player games. I like single player shooters, and please let them live.